Hello and welcome back to Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and we'll be talking about all things cloud. Now, I hope that you're keeping safe and well in these strange times that we're going through. You may have noticed a drop off on my episodes over the recent weeks and months, and that's because I've had to take some time away to focus on my own health. But all is good, and I'm looking forward to getting a rhythm going again with these podcast episodes. So as always, if you have topic suggestions or you want to come and talk with me in an episode, please just let me know. You can find more info online at www.cloudwithchris.com. Now on to this episode. When we think about the cloud, we typically think about distributed systems and somehow bringing those different components or systems together, so integrating them. But what are the common practices or maybe the common challenges? You've probably heard of serverless. How does that fit into things? Well, I'm pleased to be joined by Ezhilarasi Chezhiyan, Technical Lead at Serverless360. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight in. Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. So it's been a little while since we've had an episode together, but we're going to be jumping straight back into things here and talking about a topic which is very near and dear to my heart, actually. It's something where I've been working on serverless technologies for a little bit recently, and I'm very happy to be joined by Ezhilarasi, hopefully I said that right, who is the technical lead at Serverless360 and has been doing a lot of work with things like Azure Logic Apps, Functions, Service Bus, all those common staple technologies that we would see in a serverless kind of workload. So, Ezhilarasi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for this wonderful introduction. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Very glad to have you with us. So, reading through your bio that will be up on the website,
Mhm.
we saw things like Azure Logic Apps, Functions, Service Bus, a career that has spent a decade in the IT field. So, what took you into this serverless space, I guess? What kind of excited you about it? And what are the kind of things you're working on? Maybe let's start there.
Yeah. So I work as a technical lead and product consultant of Serverless360, the product that is designed to complement the Azure Portal while dealing with serverless integration solutions. So now you had have got the answer pretty much, like what dragged me into serverless technologies. So my work into this product is what the platform that opened me up to start exploring the integration solutions that Microsoft Azure offers. And as you rightly mentioned, the topic that is near and dear to you, it is so close to my heart as well, because as I started exploring into this space, and my exposure into IT industry is more than a decade. And comparing the way we have been building the applications and how these integration solutions have transformed the way we build applications have attracted me to explore more on them. Like now we are fortunate enough to live in an era wherein I can build a real smart application, like putting together Lego blocks, and that comfortable is what working with the integration services are.
I think one of the great things about this evolution of serverless really is the fact that it's so cost efficient. I mean, this project that I mentioned, I've started working on. Uh, I've been doing quite a lot with Azure Functions and ingesting data, putting it into Cosmos DB,
Mm.
and I was curious how much it would cost me. I was curious how long it would take.
Mm.
So I coded this thing out, and I think there were a good 100,000 records or so. And within the space of a couple of minutes, completely ingested them all, did the aggregation over everything that I needed to do, and literally cost me pennies. And that's
Yeah.
amazing, right? And
Yes.
I think that's one of the great things. Yeah, sorry.
Exactly. You spotted the right point, because ultimately it is about how much do we spend to get this running, isn't it? Moreover, I just get to focus on my core business, and the scaling, the reliability, availability, the infrastructure, everything is being abstracted from me. So that is one of the best parts of these serverless services, isn't it, Chris?
Absolutely. You get to focus on your service, your product. You don't have to worry about the underlying mechanics and the plumbing and how everything's set up. You just, continue enhancing your product. When we think about that DevOps mindset of being very kind of product driven and customer centric, it really allows you to do that and have that focus. Exactly.
Yeah. And as a part of my job, I get to interact with customers who are integration architects in big brands, to mention like the world's largest shipping company, or the legend in the communication field. So I get to talk to the MVPs, the solution architects, and that is where major of my learnings are acquired from, when I get exposed into various domains, and when we observe how these integration solutions have contributed to build real-time reactive solutions in across these domains, the learning is immense. Like, they are indeed real powerful, and they help us solve real complex things at ease.
It's interesting because I think one of the things you mentioned in the summary there was about reactive systems and event driven systems. And
Hmm,
that is fundamentally what serverless is based upon, isn't it? This idea that, you're not going to be polling for that thing to happen. There's
exactly.
some kind of trigger, there's some kind of thing that happens, and you react to that. And that's where some of that cost benefit and efficiency really comes from. You don't need that resource necessarily running all the time. Of course, you can. But if it's a type of resource that doesn't need to, then great. You can certainly adapt to that world. So I guess
Mhm.
what I'd be interested in, you mentioned, a few different industries and all those learnings.
Hmm.
What are maybe some of the common things across those industries that you see maybe from that integration of those serverless technologies?
Yeah. So one common scenario that I observe, when we try to generalize these integration solutions, what we generally observe is an queuing mechanism. Like, they might have an order processing scenario, wherein, so this order processing is very generic. It could be in an e-commerce solution, or it could be in logistics, in a communication platform. Like, anywhere you can come across a scenario like order processing, wherein they would generally have an queuing mechanism and workflow definition, and then some computation that involves their legacy business logic, and all these are connected together with the help of an event driving platform like an event grid. So service bus queue would be there as a reliable messaging platform, which picks up the order requests from their customers, and then it provides its own properties and definitions that can help me in dealing with real time business requirements, just by configuring the properties of the queue. And I can define the workflow of my business execution using the logic apps. I do not need to write a single line of code, because I have hundreds of connectors readily available, through which I can just plug and then define my workflow at ease. And in case if they have any legacy computations to be done, they have their Azure functions, wherein they can feel free to write their own custom logic, and then that can be easily stitched into this logic app to get the computation done. And as you rightly mentioned, instead of polling for the messages to arrive, they can carefully stitch the logic app and the service bus with the help of an event grid that can let the logic app know when the message has arrived, so that it's more cost efficient and real-time reactive application.
There's so many great things I want to jump upon on what you said in there. I'm trying to think where to start off with, but um, if for anyone who's been listening to a few of the podcasts I've done in the past,
Okay.
they'll know that architecture is something that is very, very close to my heart. Again, just like this topic,
Mhm.
and there were a couple of themes in what you said in there. Just to pull those out for people, one is the idea of a queue-based load leveling pattern. This idea that you decouple whatever the sender is and the receiver
Yes.
is by this kind of async messaging bus, whatever it is, and that's then not going to overwhelm that back end system. So I think that's one of the key things. But then if you have let's say, a Logic app or an Azure function or something like that, which is the receiver, then you've got another pattern in there called competing consumers potentially,
Hmm.
where you can then go and scale up those instances to work in parallel and
Mhm.
just bring whatever is in that queue down more quickly. So there's some great proven practices out there again to help with the scale of these types of systems. They can be very, very efficient.
So I was about to say each one of these services that we just mentioned are individual topics on their own, and the way these technologies has been built to meet the real-time requirements are amazing. Like when we pick up the service bus queues itself, say like they have got a lot of implicit properties that can straight away map on to the real-time business needs. Say for example, requires duplicate detection is one, just a property to turn on that automatically keeps track of duplicate messages being rejected when they are coming in. So I was just about to mention that you get to solve your real-time business needs at a click by configuring a property in a queue.
Understood.
Yeah.
And yeah, that there's some great value and some great just really great things as part of those services. I guess again, going back onto the architecture angle as well,
Hmm.
when we think about integration as a whole, we've been talking about different kind of messaging sources and syncs and the different pipes that you're kind of traveling along there as well. It all goes back to what everyone, I guess, is used to from a messaging perspective.
Hmm.
Some of those concepts translate across this idea that if you've got a very complex integration architecture, you could use topics and subscriptions in a service bus, for example, to go
Correct.
and route between the different components. So all of that complex enterprise architecture environment and those integrations that may be needed in a very large corporation
Hmm.
can actually be really easy when you start thinking about using serverless and service bus or queuing mechanisms to solve those problems, right?
Yes, very true, very true. So we have got customers who have a n number of subscriptions on their topics to deal with multiple of their customer scenarios. So when we look at the classic way of solving this problem statement, it could be more complex. But here I just need to take care of applying appropriate filters on my subscriptions and diversifying the traffic into the right client subscriber. That's it. Like, and I have an clean segregation of duties among my client applications, and I clearly deal with my customers separately. So this is very convenient to deal with the multiple subscriber scenario as well.
And do you see, maybe any themes in like the architecture designs or the technologies that people are using from different companies that you're working with and different customers, for example? I'm curious about
Hmm.
maybe some of the either good practices or
Hmm.
some of the things that people get tempted to go and do and maybe shouldn't do, for example. What are some of the things you've learned along the way?
Yeah. What we observe in the industry trend is many are just adapting to Azure. So, we are still in the phase of nurturing our customers to rightly use the technologies offered by Azure. So often, most of the product demonstrations or discussion calls will start becoming into an Azure education sessions. So one key thing that we could observe among our customers is like they are confused between messages and events that they are dealing with, and when to use the right messaging service in their architecture. Say, when we talk about these messaging services, I need to mention three of them: Azure Service Bus, Event Grid, and Event Hubs. And all three of them have a very distinct role to play in. And as we were talking about messages and events, so one clear difference between a message and an event is, so event just lets the gives an intimation that something has happened, wherein I am just bothered about um, whether the action has happened or not. But in case of a message, I am more concerned about the data that it is carrying, because that is important for me to further proceed with my business workflow. So when my scenario is to deal with a message, Say, for example, an order processing scenario that we just talked about, wherein I require the data of the message to proceed further with the processing of the order. I need to put in a message handling service there, which could be a service bus queue or topic, depends on whether I need to deal with the one-to-one or one-to-many scenario. Whereas if my scenario is like, say, for example, I have a vehicle telematic application. Say I have devices across the world and vehicles across the world which are implanted with telematic devices, and I expect my ingesting service to collect all the events and give me a telematic database that lets me know how are my vehicles performing, what speed are they traveling, when is their insurance due, and all. So in this complex scenario, I need to read all the events from the devices that has been deployed on vehicles across the world, which is going to be huge per second. So I have a service like Event Hub which can help me with this. So when it is just aggregating two services, like an whenever a message arrives in the queue, I need to trigger an logic app. Then I need to choose an event service like Event Grid. So all these three have very distinct characteristics, but it is very easy for me to get confused and use them inappropriately in places where the other service has to be chosen. So this I have observed in many of the customers trying hard to fix the right service in the right place.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a topic I've certainly seen as well. The whole
Hmm.
idea between an event and a message and what is the difference. And I love the way you said it. I've heard that
Hmm.
description before, that an event is, you don't care who's listening. You're just kind of saying, "Hey, I've done this thing,"
Yeah.
just so you all know.
Hmm.
And then the message is more of more of something that you're a bit more precious around. You care about the actual body of data that is being sent across, and something has to be done with that. And you want to make sure that something is done.
Definitely.
So, more reliable, I guess, than just fire and forget. Let's say. Um, so yeah, those key differences are fundamental into that serverless and integration kind of world there.
Mm.
Um, when we think about event grid, like you say,
Hmm.
reactive programming really is what that's intended. Event hubs is more like that big data pipeline, and there are two
Exactly.
main areas I see that being used. I'm curious what you see as well, but event hubs typically in the IoT space, like the
Yeah.
smart vehicle one you were mentioning,
Hmm.
and also like big data, log ingestion, that kind of thing as well. I see it come up as well. And then Service Bus, of course, the very typical enterprise messaging platform. So there's a choice for everyone, I guess, is what we're saying here, right? There's a choice for everyone in terms of the different, decoupling mechanisms that you have, the
Yeah.
different serverless options that you have as well, and different ways that you can go and build those Lego pieces together.
Exactly. And one more important factor that I would like to emphasize here is, Chris. So, all these messaging platforms or event processing platforms are promising to provide 99.99 percentage of reliable service. But when we look into this point, not 1% of failure, that itself is huge. So when we build the application, we should be cautious to build our application to be failure resilient. So you should have your logic set to handle these failures. So that is something that we need to take care of when we build applications.
So in terms of the reliability you're thinking, and tolerance to downtime, I guess, and tolerance to potential impact for our solution, that kind of thing is what you're thinking there.
Correct. There is a possibility of me missing to process a message. Like the still you can access them in the dead letter queue. So that has to be considered in your business logic, is what I mean to say. Like you have
Mm,
a mechanism to dead letter a message, but you should also make sure that the dead lettered messages are handled appropriately, so that none of the
yes.
message in your business goes unprocessed.
Yeah, there's a few gotchas, aren't there, around the whole processing side of things, I guess. So
Hmm.
dead letters are a prime example of that. What happens if you get a message which is going to block your queue? You obviously don't
Exactly.
want that, so dead letter them exactly that, and making sure. a critical business event doesn't go missed.
Correct.
But also things as simple as like retries and circuit breakers as well.
Correct.
What happens if, for whatever reason, you can't communicate to one of those service buses or whatever piece in the middle you might be using? How do you deal with that? And depending on the application, depending on the solution and the actual environment you're working in, that could be absolutely fine. If it's something where it doesn't particularly matter if a message goes missing, fair enough. But if it's
Hmm.
something like a financial system, like a bank or a trading system, losing a message could mean potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds, potentially.
Indeed.
Um, so different scales, I guess, is the point there.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that is exactly the space that we are working in. Like the Azure portal focuses on strengthening the technologies to provide more reliable and um, uh, whatnot solutions. But what we as a product are focusing on is to complement the Azure portal by filling in gaps, like providing a capability to process these dead letters or throwing light on black boxes in the Azure portal to help the operations are supporting better utilize their deal with their integration solutions.
Okay, so being able to, I guess, help the end application development teams be more, I guess you said it earlier, right? Be more intelligent around some of those things that will
Exactly.
happen inside of their systems. So, rather than them having to go from scratch and having to go and deal with those in some way, that's where the services that you provide come in to help people accelerate that path, I guess, and make that journey a bit easier.
Exactly. You got it on. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And are there particular things that you see people running into quite commonly, I guess? I guess we mentioned the dead letter piece already. Are
Hmm.
there other examples, or is that really the prime one you would say?
Yeah. So when they are working with logic apps and Azure functions, one predominant challenge that people encounter are their failures. See, they do not realize when the logic app runs has failed and what could be the reason of the failure. So these could be a day in and day out. When the application is in production, this could be very critical because there are a number of reasons why a logic app or a function would fail, but this indeed translates to my business failing to process an important message. So that is also another space wherein we help with our product to detect the failures, and give them a convenient interface wherein they can understand what the failure is. So like we don't stop with diagnosing the failure, we also give them the necessary details to react to that failure. And when we are working with the logic apps, often like people fail to configure the retry policies appropriately, so that, so this is some recommendation which we provide to configure the retry policies on their logic app runs appropriately in the Azure portal itself, to ensure their business is like resilient to failures.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the whole retry policy piece is something which is a great benefit that you get with Logic Apps. If I was using something like Azure Functions,
Mhm.
again, I have to deal with that overhead myself, and that's fine. If I've got a team of app developers, but if I'm maybe building a very quick application using Power Apps and I need some back end systems for that, then Logic Apps makes that really nice and easy for me to go and either POC or actually build that end to end system out and have that running. And yeah, the retry policies piece is something critical to that, and any distributed cloud system, really, right? If the if the other receiving component isn't there for whatever reason
Hmm.
temporarily,
Hmm.
and you get that transient failure, retries are very important. But there's, of course, then I mentioned circuit breaker earlier. If you keep retrying something, you could just be exacerbating the problem, and you need to potentially turn off that retry for a little while and back off in some way. So, if anyone's new to cloud and interested in some of those architectural patterns, take a look on the Azure Architecture Center, because they're all up there, and you'll definitely see those cropping up time and time again. Um, I want to go back to the first point though, because I think there was something really interesting you said in there as well around the monitoring side of things.
Hmm.
There's I guess thinking about this distributed system scenario again, there's a lot of times where I I see customers starting to go down the microservices route. They've not necessarily done it before, or maybe they've just done it with maybe a few microservices. But once they start, it's that growing problem of we've got 5, we've got 10, we've got 50, we've got 100, and
Hmm.
trying to, I guess, monitor all of those, for example. And I guess you touched upon that a little bit
Mhm.
in terms of what hasn't been processed, what is the impact, and where has that happened as well. So it would be good just to expand on that a little bit and understand some of the trends you see there as well.
Yeah, indeed. So, what we observe in the industries now is like, as you rightly mentioned, their Azure consumption keeps growing. As they start migrating into the cloud, they tend to build a number of integrations in the Azure platform. And ideally, it becomes clumsy and hard to manage and monitor them in the Azure portal. So they lose track of into which business application does it actually correspond to, what is its state is right now, and how efficiently is it performing now. So to answer these questions is where we brought in our product to solve all these. So we help them map their solutions into composite applications and get in real-time monitoring done in our product Serverless 360. And Azure portal itself has a certain implicit monitoring solutions like Azure Monitor, log analytics, application insights. So these can give you a better visualization on when does your resources going wrong. So anything that cannot be covered with these monitors, or which are all very complex for an operations or support person to understand and infer, those can be addressed with the help of Serverless 360. So Serverless 360 is even recommended by Microsoft itself as an ideal tool for monitoring service bus and logic apps and function apps. So uh, what we are trying to solve is to give the capabilities that will complement the Azure portal, in especially in the monitoring space on these integration solutions. So how are they connected with each other? How are the components in my integration solution connected with each other? How does status of one of the resource impact the other? Or how does a message flow through every component of my business application? These are certain unsolved questions, that challenges that our customers pose to us, and we are glad that we have solutions for all of them.
Understood. Completely get it. So
Mhm.
I guess what I'm hearing then, maybe to translate for people listening, is
Hmm.
you've got log analytics, Azure Monitor, and App Insights, which are more infrastructure monitoring, app level monitoring, but they have no real intelligence around the underlying business or mapping, I suppose, of those different services and infrastructure components to what the business is doing.
Hmm.
Whereas then the value add from yourselves, for example, is taking those different services, being able to identify the common links, the relationships, the maps, and whatnot. And then for the potential operators of those systems, trying to map those back from a business perspective so then they can determine potential impacts along the way, then rather than finding where is the needle in the haystack, they
Hmm.
know which haystack they then need to go look into, what the needle is, and what the needle has then gone and maybe impacted then as well. Is that right? Have I understood?
That's an impressive summary, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as you were saying it, I was like, right, I get this. This makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
but yeah, that sounds interesting because I guess that really then takes quite a mature setup, I suppose, because
Mhm.
I think again, thinking of my customers, uh, a lot of them are, starting to think about monitoring and all these things when they move into the cloud, which is great.
Mhm.
But there is always this problem of distributed computing, and if there is a problem on one side, how do you know what is impacted in the other? So
Exactly.
having those correlations, uh, you can absolutely do in App Insights, but to the level from a business perspective to try and implement that, again, people could do it, but it's probably going to take a lot of time, I guess is the point.
That's true. Exactly. App Insights is ideal for developers, not for business users, in fact.
Mm,
Yeah.
excellent.
Mhm.
So I guess thinking through then, we've covered quite a lot of ground there. We've talked about some of the different serverless components. We've talked about maybe some of the architectural pieces. We've talked about then some of the common challenges with things like dead lettering and distributed monitoring. Is there anything else top of mind that you wanted to bring up before we maybe start wrapping up here?
I think we talked about a lot for the listeners to digest, and it's a great platform for people to explore and then experiment with the integration solutions. So all that I recommend is like it's very easy for us to self learn these Azure offered integration solutions. Try exploring; you would be amazed how easily you can build real smart applications.
Excellent. And very cheap too, we should add.
Yeah,
Remember that if you go for those consumption plans,
yeah.
uh, like I said earlier, I ran a system to integrate sorry, not integrate, ingest a load of data for a project that I'm working on personally.
Hmm.
Hundreds of thousands of records. Of course, I had to scale up Cosmos DB to handle that a little bit, but it
Hmm.
dealt with it perfectly and cost me pennies. So if you're looking to get started with some new technologies and make it inexpensive, that's certainly a good way to go. So, Ezhilarasi, thank you so much for the great session here. I think there's so many different insights that the folks listening in will have been able to learn from and understand, and I'm sure, no doubt, we'll have a lot of people going and starting to look at serverless technologies and distributed integration as well here.
Thank you, Chris. You made me so comfortable, and it was a great conversation, in fact. Thanks a lot for having me here today.
Very welcome. Glad to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
There we go. Plenty to take in. Logic apps, Azure Functions, Event Grid, Service Bus, and more. Serverless technologies are a great way to build out your distributed applications, and we learned that they can be reactive or event-driven, which can lead us towards cost efficiencies and only paying for what we need rather than compute on an ongoing basis. We also heard about some of the potential challenges when operating these types of solutions, including distributed monitoring and considerations about message handling. If you haven't already, it's well worth taking a look at the Azure Architecture Center to understand how some of those patterns that we talked about fit into a serverless solution. Now, as always, thank you so much for listening. Your support and engagement is the reason that I do these podcasts. I'd love to hear from you. Is there a topic you'd like me to talk about, or someone you'd like me to chat with? Do you have particular questions you want to hear answered? Let me know through the website www.cloudwithchris.com, and I'll be sure to put that onto the backlog so we can plan those in. And while you're here, don't forget to like or subscribe across my different platforms and social media channels. Thank you once again, and until next time, goodbye.